The sun was setting over the quiet town of Brooksville, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Officer Jake Reynolds had spent the last 10 years serving as a K-9 handler, and his partner Rex, a fierce yet loyal German shepherd, was more than just a dog. He was family. Rex had saved Jake's life more times than he could count, sniffing out drugs, tracking criminals, and even taking a bullet for him once. The bond between them was unbreakable. But that evening, as Jake drove home after his shift, a drunk driver swerved into his lane. The crash was brutal. Rex, who was in the back of the patrol car, survived with minor injuries, but Jake didn't make it. The news shattered the police department. Rex refused to leave Jake's side, even as paramedics carried his body away. He whimpered, pawing at the stretcher, as if begging Jake to wake up. No one knew it yet, but this was only the beginning of Rex's journey, one that would leave the entire town in awe. The police station was draped in a heavy silence the next morning. Rex sat by Jake's empty desk, his ears perked up every time the door opened, as if expecting his partner to walk in any moment. Officers moved around him with soft steps, their eyes red from crying. Some reached down to pat Rex's head, but he barely reacted, his gaze fixed on the spot where Jake's chair used to be. Sergeant Harris, Jake's closest friend, knelt beside Rex and stroked his fur. "I know, boy, we miss him too," he whispered, his voice breaking. Rex let out a low whine, as if understanding every word. The funeral was set for 3 days later, and the entire town prepared to say goodbye to their fallen hero. Jake's family requested that Rex be allowed to attend. After all, he was Jake's partner till the end. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. The night before the funeral, Rex disappeared. Officers searched the station, the streets, even Jake's old patrol routes, but there was no sign of him. Some thought he had run away, unable to bear the grief. Others feared the worst, that he had gone looking for Jake in some desperate final act of loyalty. Meanwhile, deep in the woods on the outskirts of town, Rex was on the move. His nose was pressed to the ground, following a scent only he could detect. It led him to an abandoned shack hidden behind thick trees. Inside, a man was counting stacks of cash, the same man who had been driving the car that killed Jake. The drunk driver had fled the scene, leaving Jake to die, and now he thought he was safe. But Rex knew better. The dog's muscles tensed, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. He didn't bark, didn't growl, he just watched, waiting for the right moment. Back in town, panic was setting in. The police had just received an anonymous tip about the drunk driver's possible location, but without Rex, their best tracker, they had no way to confirm it. Sergeant Harris stared at Jake's empty chair, then at the missing poster with Rex's photo. "Where are you, boy?" he muttered. Little did he know, Rex was already steps ahead of them, preparing to deliver justice in a way no one saw coming. The night air was thick with tension as Rex crouched in the shadows of the abandoned shack, his golden eyes locked onto the man inside, the same man whose reckless actions had ripped Jake away from him. The scent was unmistakable. Rex had memorized it from the wreckage, from the torn fabric of Jake's uniform where the drunk driver's car had smashed into them. The man laughed quietly to himself as he stuffed wads of cash into a duffel bag, completely unaware of the predator watching him from just beyond the tree line. Rex's muscles coiled like springs, every instinct in his body screaming for him to attack, but he held back. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, and justice had to be delivered the right way. Back in Brooksville, the police department was in chaos. The anonymous tip about the drunk driver's location had sent officers scrambling, but without Rex, their search was slow and uncertain. Sergeant Harris paced the station, his mind racing. He knew Rex wouldn't just run away. Not after everything he and Jake had been through. There had to be a reason. Then it hit him. "The wreckage," he muttered under his breath. He rushed to the evidence locker and pulled out the drunk driver's belongings: a torn jacket, a wallet, a set of keys. He held the jacket up to his nose, inhaling deeply. The faint scent of alcohol and cheap cologne lingered. If Rex had picked up this scent, there was no telling where he might have gone. Harris grabbed his radio and barked orders. "I need every available unit to sweep the woods near the old mill, and someone get me a K9 unit, now." Meanwhile, inside the shack, the drunk driver, now identified as Marcus Doyle, finally zipped up his duffel bag and reached for his phone. He dialed a number and smirked. "Yeah, it's done. The cops won't find me here. I'll lay low for a few days, then cross state lines." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Don't worry about the dog. What's he gonna do? Bite me?" He laughed again, but the sound died in his throat as a low, guttural growl echoed through the shack. Marcus froze, his blood turning to ice. Slowly, he turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was Rex. The German shepherd's teeth were bared, his hackles raised, his eyes burning with a fury that sent chills down Marcus's spine. The dog didn't lunge, he didn't bark. He just stood there, blocking the only exit, his presence alone enough to paralyze Marcus with fear. Outside, the distant wail of police sirens cut through the night. Rex's ears twitched at the sound, but he didn't move. Marcus's hands shook as he reached for a nearby crowbar, his mind racing for a way out. "Get back!" he shouted, swinging the crowbar wildly. Rex dodged with effortless grace, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. The sirens grew louder, closer. Marcus's breath came, in ragged gasps. He was trapped, and he knew it. In a last desperate act, he hurled the crowbar at Rex and bolted for the back window. But Rex was faster. With a single, powerful leap, he slammed into Marcus, knocking him to the ground. The man screamed as Rex's jaws clamped down on his arm. Not enough to break bone, but enough to make sure he couldn't escape. The police burst into the shack moments later, their flashlights illuminating the scene. Sergeant Harris was the first through the door, his gun drawn. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Rex stood over Marcus, his grip firm but controlled, his eyes flicking up to meet Harris's gaze. It was as if the dog was saying, "I found him. I did this for Jake." Harris lowered his gun and slowly approached, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good boy, Rex. Good boy." As officers cuffed Marcus and dragged him away, Rex finally released his grip. He sat back on his haunches, his chest heaving, his eyes never leaving Harris. The sergeant knelt beside him, running a hand through the dog's fur. "You did it, buddy. You got him." Rex leaned into the touch, his body trembling with exhaustion and grief. But there was something else in his eyes, something that made Harris's heart ache. It was the look of a dog who had just lost everything, but who wasn't ready to give up. The next morning, the entire town buzzed with the news. Rex, the heroic K9, had single-handedly tracked down Jake's killer. But as the sun rose over Brooksville, casting long shadows across the police station, Rex was nowhere to be found. Again. This time, however, Harris had a hunch where he might be. He grabbed Jake's old patrol cap and a leash, then headed for the one place he knew Rex would go, the place where Jake's memory would live on forever. The morning mist clung to the grass of Brooksville Cemetery as Sergeant Harris pushed open the wrought iron gates, his boots crunching lightly on the gravel path. He didn't need to check the map to find Jake's plot. A fresh mound of earth stood out among the weathered headstones, flanked by wilting floral arrangements from yesterday's service. But it was the dark shape curled against the raw soil that made Harris's breath catch. Rex lay pressed against the grave like a living monument, his muzzle resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the carved letters of Jake's name. The dog's ribs rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths, as if matching the rhythm of the earth itself. Harris approached cautiously, noticing how Rex's ears twitched at his footsteps, but the dog didn't lift his head. "Hey there, partner," Harris murmured, kneeling beside the grave. Up close, he could see the dried blood matted in Rex's fur from last night's confrontation, the raw scrapes on his paws from miles of running. The dog smelled of damp earth and pine needles, with the faint metallic tang of the struggle still clinging to him. As Harris reached out, Rex finally turned his head, fixing the sergeant with eyes that held depths of understanding no ordinary animal should possess. The dog's gaze flicked to the patrol cap in Harris's hand, Jake's cap, and a full-body shudder ran through him. Then, without warning, Rex stood and pressed his nose against the fabric, inhaling deeply before letting out a sound that wasn't quite a whine, not quite a howl, but something primal that raised the hair on Harris's arms. The sergeant's radio crackled to life with a dispatcher's voice reporting more developments in the Marcus Doyle case, but he barely heard it. In that moment, he understood with chilling clarity that Rex wasn't just mourning, he was waiting. For what, Harris couldn't say, but the realization settled in his gut like a stone. The sound of approaching engines broke the spell. 3 news vans rolled to a stop outside the cemetery gates, cameras already swiveling toward the scene. Harris moved instinctively to block their view, but it was too late. By noon, footage of the hero dog-keeping vigil would be airing on every local channel, and by evening, it would go national. A young reporter with perfectly coiffed hair and a microphone emblazoned with a network logo slipped through the gates before Harris could stop her. "Sergeant, can you confirm the German Shepherd apprehended Jake Reynolds' killer?" she called, her cameraman close behind. Rex's reaction was instantaneous. His lips peeled back in a silent snarl, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Harris threw out an arm to hold the reporter back just as the dog let out a thunderous bark that echoed between the headstones. The cameraman stumbled backward, his equipment clattering to the ground. In the chaos that followed, Harris managed to usher Rex away from the growing crowd, his mind racing. The media circus was the last thing Jake would have wanted, and certainly not what Rex needed now. As they reached the shelter of a massive oak tree, the dog suddenly stiffened, his nose lifting to catch a scent on the wind. Before Harris could react, Rex was moving again, not toward the commotion at the gates, but deeper into the cemetery, his pace quickening with purpose. The sergeant followed, his pulse pounding in his ears, as Rex led him past row after row of graves until they reached a secluded section near the back fence. There, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs, stood a simple headstone Harris hadn't noticed before. The dates told the story, a life cut short at just 24 years old. The name made his blood run cold, Daniel Price. Jake's first partner, killed in the line of duty 5 years ago during a botched drug bust, the case that had haunted Jake until his dying day. Rex circled the grave twice before lying down with a sigh, his chin resting on the weathered stone. Harris sank to his knees beside him, his mind reeling. How did Rex know about Daniel? Jake never brought the dog here. Harris was certain of that. Yet here they were, as if drawn by some invisible thread connecting past and present. The sergeant's fingers traced the grooves of Daniel's name as pieces clicked together in his mind. The way Jake had volunteered for K-9 duty after Daniel's death. His obsession with cleaning up the drug trade that had killed his friend. The late nights spent reviewing old case files. And now Rex, the living legacy of that obsession, lying between the graves of the 2 men who had shaped each other's lives. A rustling in the bushes snapped Harris back to the present. Rex was on his feet instantly, his body rigid with alertness. The branches parted to reveal not a reporter or curious onlooker, but a gaunt man in his 50s with hollow cheeks and darting eyes. Harris recognized him immediately. Carl Shades Thompson, a small-time informant who had floated through Jake's cases for years. The man's hands shook as he held them up in surrender. "Easy, Sarge. I ain't here for trouble," he rasped, his gaze flicking nervously to Rex. "I heard about Jake, and I heard what his dog did." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Thing is, that crash wasn't no accident. Doyle was running scared because he knew too much. About the new shipment coming in next week, about the guys who really killed Danny Price all those years ago." Harris felt the world tilt around him. Rex let out a low growl that vibrated through the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll, its mournful notes hanging in the air like a warning. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The church bell's echoes still hung in the air when Harris grabbed Shades by the collar, slamming him against the oak tree hard enough to shake loose a rain of acorns. Rex circled them like a living shadow, his growl a continuous rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Start talking," Harris hissed, "and it better be good, or I'll let the dog decide what to do with you." Shades's eyes darted between the sergeant and Rex, his breath coming in quick, panicked bursts that smelled of stale cigarettes and fear. He licked his cracked lips before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doyle was just a pawn. The real players, they've been operating in Brooksville for years. Jake knew too much after Danny's death. He was getting close." A shudder ran through the informant's body as Rex nudged closer, his wet nose brushing against Shade's trembling hand. "There's a warehouse down by the old docks. Tonight, midnight, they're moving the biggest shipment since the one Danny intercepted." Harris released his grip, his mind racing. Danny Price's case had been officially closed as a random drug deal gone bad, but Jake had never believed that. He'd spent years chasing shadows, compiling evidence in secret files even Harris didn't know about. Now, Rex stood panting between Danny and Jake's graves, his ears twitching at every word as if understanding more than any dog should. The sergeant pulled out his phone to call for backup, but Shades grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "No radios, no phones. They've got people everywhere, even in your station." His bloodshot eyes bored into Harris's. Jake's files, he hid them somewhere only his dog would know. A cold realization washed over Harris. He looked down at Rex, who had gone eerily still, his intelligent eyes locked onto the sergeant's face. The dog suddenly turned and trotted toward the cemetery gates with purposeful strides, pausing only to glance back as if to say, "Follow me." Harris hesitated just long enough for Shades to mutter, "I ain't going anywhere near that," before vanishing into the bushes like a ghost. The drive to Jake's house was tense. Rex sat shotgun, his nose pressed against the window as neighborhoods blurred past. Every so often, he'd whine low in his throat when they passed certain landmarks: the 24-hour diner where Jake used to get their post-shift pancakes, the fire hydrant Rex had claimed as his own, the intersection where Jake would always roll down the window so Rex could smell the ocean breeze. Harris's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. It was like the dog was retracing memories, and the sergeant couldn't shake the feeling that Rex was leading him somewhere specific, not just home. Jake's bungalow looked achingly normal in the afternoon light. The faded welcome mat, the wind chimes made from spent bullet casings, the overgrown flower beds Jake had always promised to tend next weekend. Harris's throat tightened as he turned the key Jake's sister had given him. The air inside smelled like leather and gun oil with undertones of the peppermint candies Jake constantly sucked on. Rex bounded in ahead of him, nails clicking against hardwood as he made straight for the back office, the room Harris knew Jake had converted into his private investigation hub. What they found there stopped Harris in his tracks. The walls were papered with photos, newspaper clippings, and scrawled notes connected by a spiderweb of red string. At the center stood Danny Price's autopsy photo, circled repeatedly in what looked like black marker. But what chilled Harris to the bone were the recent additions: surveillance shots of high-ranking city officials, judges, even two fellow officers shaking hands with known drug traffickers. A sticky note on one photo read in Jake's messy scrawl, "Same pattern as Danny's case. Same players. Different faces." Rex nosed at the bottom drawer of Jake's desk, whining until Harris pulled it open to reveal a false bottom. Beneath it lay a black flash drive taped to a yellowed piece of paper. Harris's hand shook as he unfolded it. Danny Price's original case notes, the ones that had mysteriously disappeared from evidence. A post-it stuck to the top read, "Rex knows where to go if something happens to me. Trust him like you'd trust me." The dog was already at the front door, pawing impatiently. As Harris followed, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll end up like your friends." He stared at the message, then at Rex's determined stance in the doorway. The choice was clear. He grabbed Jake's spare service weapon from the hall closet and checked the magazine. "All right, boy," he murmured, scratching behind Rex's ears the way Jake used to. "Let's go meet your friends." Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. Rex led Harris not to the car, but down the alley behind Jake's house, toward the train tracks that cut through Brooksville's industrial district. As they walked, Harris noticed the dog's behavior change. His ears perked forward, his gait became stealthier, his tail rigid. This wasn't just a path, it was a patrol route. Jake had trained Rex for this. The realization hit Harris like a bullet. Rex wasn't just a grieving pet, he was a cop, just like his partner. And he was about to help take down the people who killed both his handlers. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, its mournful cry blending with the first few notes of the evening church bells. The hunt was on. The industrial district smelled of rusted metal and rotting wood as Harris followed Rex through the maze of abandoned warehouses, the dog's silhouette flickering in and out of view like a phantom in the moonlight. His paws made no sound on the cracked pavement, his body moving with a precision that went beyond animal instinct. This was calculated, trained movement. The flash drive burned a hole in Harris's pocket, its weight a constant reminder of what Jake had died for. Every shadow seemed to breathe as they approached the waterfront, the lapping of oily waves against concrete piers masking their approach. Rex suddenly froze, his body tensing like a drawn bowstring. Harris crouched beside him, following the dog's gaze to Warehouse 17, where two armed men patrolled the loading dock under the sickly yellow glow of flickering floodlights. Their casual stance spoke of routine, but the military-grade rifles slung across their backs told a different story. A muffled voice crackled from one guard's radio. "Delivery's early." "Boss wants everyone sharp. No screw-ups this time." Harris's fingers tightened around his service weapon. This wasn't just a drug shipment. The firepower, the coordination, it screamed something bigger. Rex nudged Harris's knee with his snout, then gestured with his head toward a rusted drainage pipe running along the warehouse's east side. The sergeant's breath caught. Jake must have trained Rex for urban infiltration, because the pipe led straight to a shattered vent opening 20 feet up. Impossible for a human, perfect for a 90-pound German shepherd. Harris hesitated, gripping Rex's collar. "Listen, buddy, I need you to scout. Only scout. No heroics." The dog locked eyes with him, and in that moment Harris saw Jake's stubborn determination reflected in those amber depths. Then Rex was gone, melting into the darkness like liquid shadow. The weight was torture. Harris counted seconds by the throbbing pulse in his neck, straining to hear any sound over the distant foghorns. Then, a sharp clang from inside the warehouse, followed by a guard's shout abruptly cut short. Harris's blood turned to ice. Rex had broken protocol. Drawing his weapon, Harris sprinted for the warehouse's side entrance, kicking open the door just in time to see chaos unfolding. Rex moved like a four-legged nightmare between the stacked crates, dodging gunfire with terrifying agility. A guard screamed as the dog launched for his throat, only to twist midair and slam his full weight into the man's knees instead. A takedown maneuver Harris recognized from K-9 training drills. But it was the scene at the center of the warehouse that froze Harris in his tracks. 6 men in suits inspecting a shipping container filled not with drugs, but with rows of pristine military hardware. Rocket launchers, anti-tank missiles. Enough firepower to start a small war. One of the suits turned, Mayor Ellison himself, his usually polished demeanor replaced by cold fury as he spotted Harris. "Kill them both!" The order had barely left his lips when Rex let out a bone-chilling snarl and charged. Gunfire erupted. Harris dove behind a crate as bullets shredded the air where he'd stood. He returned fire, catching one guard in the shoulder, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Then the lights went out. Pitch darkness swallowed the warehouse. Harris heard panicked shouts, the clatter of dropped weapons, and above it all, the guttural sounds of Rex hunting. A man screamed. Something heavy hit the concrete. Harris pressed against the crate, heart hammering, until a wet nose nudged his hand. Rex's breath came in hot pants against his palm as the dog dropped something metallic into it. A flash drive, still warm from a computer tower. The warehouse lights flickered back on to reveal a scene from a nightmare. Guards lay unconscious or whimpering with precise, non-lethal injuries. The suits were gone, vanished through some hidden exit. Only Mayor Ellison remained, backed against the weapons crate with a snub-nosed revolver shaking in his hands. "You'll never prove anything," the mayor spat, aiming at Rex. "That mutt's just another dead dog by morning." Harris didn't get to fire. Rex moved faster, knocking the gun aside just as it discharged, the bullet ricocheting off a steel beam. The mayor scrambled backward as the dog advanced, those intelligent eyes now burning with something almost human in its intensity. Then, tires screeching outside. Back up? Number. The roar of engines was all wrong. Harris barely yanked Rex behind cover as the warehouse doors exploded inward under a barrage of automatic gunfire. Black SUVs skidded into the loading area, their tinted windows rolling down to reveal more armed men. Not cops, not even Ellison's people. These were professionals, mercenaries with no badges and no rules. Harris's radio crackled to life with dispatch's frantic voice. "All units, shots fired at Warehouse 17. Before static swallowed the transmission. Someone was jamming signals. Rex let out a warning growl as figures in tactical gear fanned out through the smoke. They moved with chilling efficiency, checking bodies, collecting discarded weapons. One kicked over a crate near Harris's hiding spot, revealing the truth. Stenciled military markings hidden beneath fresh paint. Government issue, stolen. A mercenary's boot came down inches from Harris's face. Rex bared his teeth, but Harris clamped a hand over his muzzle. One wrong move and they were dead. The man's radio squawked, cleanup complete. Proceed to Phase 2, neutralize all witnesses. Harris's blood ran cold. These weren't just criminals covering their tracks. This was a sanctioned operation. And as the first flashlight beam swept toward their hiding place, Harris realized with dawning horror that Rex had uncovered something far bigger than either of them could handle alone. The flashlight beam swept closer, illuminating the dust particles swirling like agitated fireflies in the air. Harris could taste the metallic tang of blood where he'd bitten his tongue, his free hand gripping Rex's collar so tightly the leather creaked. The dog's body vibrated with suppressed energy, every muscle coiled to spring, but he remained perfectly still, Jake's training overriding animal instinct. Just as the mercenaries' boot turned toward their hiding spot, a deafening explosion rocked the far side of the warehouse. The concussion wave sent crates toppling like dominoes, and in the chaos, Harris caught a glimpse of something impossible. A figure in a dark hoodie darting between the SUVs, tossing cylindrical objects that erupted in plumes of acrid smoke. Rex reacted before Harris could process what was happening. The dog wrenched free and bolted toward the smoke, not away from it. Harris lunged after him, bullets chewing the concrete where he'd just been. The smoke burned his eyes and throat, reducing the world to a hazy nightmare of shouting men and muzzle flashes. Then a hand clamped over his mouth from behind, dragging him behind a stack of pallets. Harris elbowed backward, connecting with something solid, but the grip only tightened. "Stop fighting, you idiot!" hissed a familiar voice, female, laced with pain and fury. The hooded figure yanked him down as a bullet whizzed overhead. In the strobe-like flashes of gunfire, Harris recognized the sharp cheekbones and wild eyes of someone he'd thought dead. Lieutenant Sarah Vance, Jake's former partner before Danny, officially killed in action 2 years ago. Vance's appearance was a punch to the gut. Her left ear was mangled, a thick scar running down her neck into her collar. She moved with a slight limp, but her hands were steady as she passed Harris a gas mask and pressed a second, smaller one into Rex's panting mouth. A custom K9 model Harris had never seen outside training manuals. "Jake's contingency plan," Vance rasped, slapping a fresh magazine into Harris's shaking hand. "He always said if things went south, his dog would find me." Rex nuzzled Vance's leg with a soft whine, his tail giving a single wag, clear recognition. The pieces clicked together with dizzying speed. Jake's personal projects, his unexplained absences, the coded notes in Danny's files. He'd been running his own Black Ops investigation through Vance, who'd been deep undercover. Another explosion rocked the warehouse, this one sending a fireball rolling across the ceiling. Vance grabbed Harris's vest, her voice cutting through the bedlam. "Ellison's just the middleman. This shipment belongs to Redmark Solutions, private military contractors with Senate connections. Danny died because he intercepted their prototype weapons test. Jake got close to proving it." She jerked her chin toward Rex, who was pawing at a grate in the floor. "Your dog's got the evidence now. That flash drive contains biometric data linking Redmark to half the unsolved cop killings in this state." Harris's mind reeled. The implications were staggering, a conspiracy stretching from Brooksville's streets to the highest levels of government. More gunfire erupted near the loading docks. Vance shoved him toward the grate where Rex waited impatiently. "Go." "The tunnels lead to the river. I'll cover you." Harris hesitated. "What about you?" Vance's smile was all teeth. "I've been dead for 2 years, Sergeant. Ghosts don't need saving." She tossed something small and metallic to Rex, who caught it midair, a USB key. "Jake's last gift. It's encrypted to respond only to Rex's bark pattern. Smart bastard trained his dog better than most techs." The grate gave way with a screech, revealing a ladder descending into inky blackness. Rex went first, his claws clicking on the rungs. Harris followed just as Vance spun away, her pistol barking 3 rapid shots. A man screamed. Then the world turned white and deafening as the entire warehouse ceiling collapsed in a rain of fire and twisted metal. The blast wave punched Harris down the shaft, his ribs screaming as he tumbled into the darkness. He hit water, icy, stinking of diesel and rot, and surfaced gasping just in time to see Rex paddling furiously toward him, the USB key still clamped in his jaws like the Holy Grail. Something heavy splashed nearby. Harris tensed, expecting a mercenary, but it was Vance's body, blood swirling around her in dark tendrils. He grabbed her vest, hauling her onto a crumbling concrete ledge where Rex was already shaking water from his fur. Vance wasn't breathing. Harris started CPR, his own lungs burning, but Rex shouldered him aside and began licking Vance's face violently, whining high in his throat. When that didn't work, the dog reared up and brought both paws down hard on her chest. Once, twice, mimicking the compressions he'd seen Jake perform during their first aid drills. Vance jerked, coughing up brackish water. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing first on Rex, then Harris. "Told you," she gasped. "Smartest damn dog alive." The sound of boots splashing through nearby tunnels sent them all scrambling deeper into the labyrinth. Vance led the way, her movements pained but precise, pausing occasionally to let Rex sniff intersections before choosing a path. The USB key gleamed in the dim light filtering through sewer grates, its contents more valuable than any of their lives. Harris's radio fizzed weakly, just enough to catch a broken transmission. "Station under attack. All units. Chief down." The words dissolved into static, but the meaning was clear. The corruption went deeper than they'd imagined. Whoever was behind this wasn't just covering tracks, they were burning the whole damn forest. Rex suddenly stopped, his nose quivering at a rusted door marked maintenance. Vance produced a key card from her soaked vest, stolen, judging by the bloodstains, and swiped it. The door creaked open to reveal a makeshift bunker lined with computers, weapons, and walls plastered with photos and documents. At the center stood a shrine-like table, holding Danny's old badge and Jake's folded uniform. Rex trotted straight to a dog bed in the corner, dropping the USB key into a waiting scanner before flopping down with an exhausted sigh. The monitors flickered to life, displaying a password prompt and a small microphone icon. Vance grinned through split lips. "Say hello to Jake's real life's work, Sergeant. The only safe house in town that requires a dog's voice to open." As Rex let out a sharp, specific series of barks, a code only he knew, the system beeped acceptance, and the screens flooded with evidence that would bring an empire crashing down. But outside, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. They'd won the battle, but the war was just beginning. The bunker's monitors cast flickering blue shadows across Lieutenant Vance's face as she pulled up security footage from police headquarters. Live images of Chief Morrison slumped in his office chair, a dark stain spreading across his shirt, while men in tactical gear ransacked filing cabinets. Harris's stomach lurched when he recognized Officer Darnell from his own precinct handing over a thick case file to a stone-faced man in a Redmark Solutions jacket. "They're purging the records," Vance muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Rex whined low in his throat, his body tense as he watched the screens with an unsettling intensity, his ears twitching at every gunshot crackling through the audio feed. The dog suddenly pawed at a specific camera angle, the evidence locker, where 2 officers were loading crates into a van marked Brooksville PDK-9 unit. Harris's blood ran cold. They're not just destroying files, they're stealing the K-9s. Vance's hands froze mid-typing. Her eyes met Harris's, and in that moment, they both understood the unspoken horror. Rex wasn't the only specially trained dog in Brooksville. Jake hadn't just been preparing Rex for this mission. He'd been coordinating with the entire K9 division. The monitors suddenly switched to a password-protected folder labeled Cerberus. Rex nudged Vance's elbow insistently until she opened it, revealing schematics of the city's underground tunnels overlaid with red markers converging on a single location, the old water treatment plant near the river. "Oh, God," Vance breathed. "They're not smuggling weapons out, they're bringing something in." The timestamp on the files indicated midnight tonight. A metallic clang echoed through the tunnels outside the bunker. Rex was on his feet instantly, his hackles raised as a low, continuous growl rumbled from his chest. Vance slapped a fresh magazine into her pistol with practiced ease. "We need to move, now." She grabbed a duffel bag from under the table, tossing Harris a Kevlar vest with K9 Handler stenciled across the back, Jake's spare. Rex sniffed at it briefly before letting out a soft woof of recognition, his tail giving one solemn wag. The gesture hit Harris harder than any bullet could. They moved through the tunnels in silence, Rex leading the way with his nose barely an inch above the damp concrete. The air grew thicker, the distant hum of machinery vibrating through the walls. Vance paused at a junction, consulting a hand-drawn map from the duffel. Jake's handwriting in the margin sent another pang through Harris's chest. "Treatment plants ahead, but we've got company." She pointed to fresh boot prints in the tunnel muck. "Large, military issue. Recent." Rex suddenly stiffened, his ears swiveling toward a sound only he could hear. Before Harris could react, the dog bolted down a side passage, his nails scrabbling against the wet stone. "Rex! Damn it!" Harris took off after him, Vance close behind. The tunnel narrowed sharply, forcing them to crouch, the stench of mildew and something sharper, chemicals, burning their nostrils. They rounded a bend and skidded to a halt. Rex stood frozen at the edge of a massive underground chamber, his body silhouetted against the eerie glow of portable work lights. The scene below made Harris's brain short-circuit. Dozens of cages lined the walls, each containing a trembling K9, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, even a few Rottweilers, all muzzled and tethered. Redmark operatives moved between them, injecting the dogs with syringes, while others fitted them with strange harnesses studded with electronic components. At the center of the chamber stood a steel table where a veterinarian in a blood-spattered lab coat was performing surgery on a sedated Malinois, implanting something near its skull. Harris's stomach twisted when he spotted the Redmark logo stamped on the equipment. Project Cerberus, Phase 3. Vance's grip on his arm was vice-like. "They're weaponizing the dogs," she whispered, her voice raw with horror, turning them against their handlers. Rex let out a barely audible whine, his body trembling not with fear, but with something far more terrifying, recognition. Harris followed the dog's gaze to a smaller cage in the corner, where a black German Shepherd with a distinctive white paw paced restlessly. Rex knew that dog, they all did. It was Coda, Jake's first K9 partner before Rex, retired last year for behavioral issues. A Redmark tech approached Coda's cage with a syringe. The moment the needle pricked his skin, the dog's eyes snapped open, glassy, unfocused, pupils dilated to black pools. His lips peeled back in a soundless snarl, strings of saliva dripping from his muzzle. The tech grinned, jotting notes on a tablet. Subject K9 responding to neural trigger, prep for field testing. Harris's radio chose that moment to crackle with static. Every head in the chamber swiveled toward their hiding spot. Rex didn't wait for the shouting to start. He launched himself into the room with a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, going straight for the nearest red mark guard's throat. Chaos erupted. Vance dragged Harris behind a stack of crates as gunfire ricocheted off the concrete walls. The caged dogs went berserk, throwing themselves against the bars with unnatural strength. Coda's cage door burst open, the drugged dog moving with terrifying precision toward the fray, not to attack the intruders, but to flank Rex protectively. The realization hit Harris like a freight train. Jake hadn't just trained Rex. He'd trained all the K9s. And whatever Redmark was pumping into them, it wasn't overriding their programming. It was enhancing it. Vance's pistol barked twice, dropping a guard who'd been lining up a shot at Rex. "We need to free those dogs," she shouted over the gunfire. Harris nodded, already moving toward the control panel on the far wall. But before he could take 3 steps, the entire chamber shook with a concussive boom from above. Dust rained from the ceiling as emergency lights strobed red. A voice boomed over the PA system. "Containment breach in Sector 4. Initiate purge protocol." The cages began unlocking automatically. The moment the cage doors clicked open, the chamber erupted into a nightmare ballet of fur and teeth and gunfire. Harris threw himself behind a pallet of medical supplies as the first wave of freed K9s launched at their captors, not with the chaotic frenzy of wild animals, but with the coordinated precision of a military strike team. Rex stood at the center of the maelstrom, his bark cutting through the chaos like a sergeant's command, directing the other dogs with sharp yips and growls that sent them fanning out to flank the Redmark operatives. Coda moved like a shadow beside him, his drugged state somehow sharpening his movements rather than dulling them, his jaws clamping down on a guard's wrist with surgical precision, severing tendons but avoiding arteries. The guard's scream was cut short as a Malinois named Juno took him down from the other side, her teeth finding the pressure point behind his knee with terrifying accuracy. Vance grabbed Harris's arm, dragging him toward the control panel as the firefight raged around them. "They're not just enhanced, they're networked," she shouted over the din, pointing to the blinking lights on the dogs' harnesses. Jake must have trained them to respond to Rex as the alpha. "Look." Harris followed her gaze to where Rex was herding 3 younger shepherds into a defensive formation near the tunnel entrance, their bodies positioned to cover each other's blind spots. It was a tactic straight out of SWAT training, adapted for 4-legged operatives. The realization hit Harris like a bucket of ice water. Project Cerberus hadn't created these monsters. It had weaponized what Jake and his team had already built. A bullet whizzed past Harris's ear, embedding itself in the control panel with a shower of sparks. The screens flickered, revealing a live feed of the surface. The water treatment plant's courtyard, where a dozen black SUVs were disgorging more Redmark mercenaries. But it was the figure stepping out of the lead vehicle that made Harris's breath catch. Director Calloway of the Department of Homeland Security, his polished shoes gleaming under the floodlights as he surveyed the chaos below. "This goes all the way to the top," Vance muttered, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Calloway's been laundering Black Ops funding through Redmark for years. Jake was getting close to proving it." Rex suddenly appeared at Harris's side, his muzzle streaked with blood that wasn't his own. He dropped a keycard at Harris's feet, stolen from a fallen guard, then nudged it toward the console with his nose. The moment Harris swiped it, the monitors switched to a new set of files, schematics for a neural override device labeled Cerberus Final Protocol. The diagram showed a satellite uplink syncing with the dog's implants, a red button marked termination sequence. Vance's face went pale. They can fry the dog's brains remotely, turn them into puppets, or kill them with a single command. Above them, the PA system crackled to life again, All teams converge on Sector 4, detonation in T-minus 10 minutes. The walls shook with another explosion, closer this time. Dust rained from the ceiling as cracks spiderwebbed across the concrete. Harris grabbed Rex's harness, staring into the dog's unnervingly intelligent eyes. "Can you get them out?" he demanded, as if expecting actual words in response. Rex tilted his head, then let out 3 sharp barks, the same pattern that had opened Jake's bunker. Across the chamber, every K9's head snapped up in unison. What happened next defied all logic. The dogs disengaged from their attacks in perfect sync, forming 2 lines flanking the tunnel exits. Coda took point, his enhanced senses apparently pinpointing the safest route, even as the facility crumbled around them. Rex stayed at Harris's side, his body vibrating with urgency as he nudged them toward the escape path. Vance hesitated, her eyes locked on the control panel. "We can't let them keep this tech," she said, yanking a flash drive from her pocket and jamming it into the console. The screens flickered as data began uploading. "Jake's failsafe. If we don't make it out, this broadcasts everything to every news outlet in the country." They ran just as the first ceiling beam came crashing down. The tunnels were a nightmare of smoke and collapsing debris, the K9 unit moving ahead like a living compass through the chaos. Harris's lungs burned as they burst into the treatment plant's courtyard, straight into the waiting guns of Redmark's perimeter team. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Director Calloway stood framed in the headlights of his SUV, his cold eyes assessing the scene. Then Rex let out a sound that wasn't a bark or a howl, but something primal and ancient, a battle cry that made the hairs on Harris's neck stand up. Every K9 attacked at once. Calloway barely had time to shout before Coda took him down, the dog's teeth closing gently but firmly on his wrist, the same way he'd been trained to subdue suspects without lethal force. The other dogs disarmed the mercenaries with terrifying efficiency, their movements too fast, too coordinated to counter. Vance grabbed Harris's shoulder, pointing to the sky where the first news helicopters were circling, drawn by the explosions. "Jake's broadcast went out," she gasped. "It's over." But Rex wasn't celebrating. The dog was staring at the treatment plant's main building, his nose twitching at something only he could sense. Harris followed his gaze just as the ground heaved under their feet. The final explosion tore through the facility, sending a fireball rolling into the night sky, and from the heart of the inferno came a sound that chilled Harris to the bone, the agonized howls of dogs still trapped inside. Rex was moving before Harris could react, streaking back toward the burning building like a golden bullet. Coda tried to block him, but Rex dodged with a snarl, his mission clear. Harris took 2 steps after him before Vance yanked him back. "You'll die," she screamed over the roar of the flames. Harris shook her off, his eyes locked on the collapsing doorway where Rex had vanished. "That's Jake's dog," he said simply. Then he ran into hell after him. The heat hit Harris like a physical wall as he plunged into the burning building, the smoke so thick it felt like swimming through tar. Flames licked up the walls in hungry orange tongues, devouring paperwork and equipment with a roar that drowned out all other sound. Somewhere in this hellscape, Rex was fighting his own battle. Harris could hear the occasional sharp bark cutting through the chaos, guiding him deeper into the collapsing structure. A support beam crashed down inches behind him, sending up a shower of sparks that stung his exposed skin. He stumbled over something soft, a body in a Redmark uniform, face unrecognizable, and barely caught himself before face-planting into the scorching floor. The air was running out. His vision pulsed at the edges, each breath searing his lungs like he was inhaling broken glass. Then he saw them. Rex stood defiant in the center of a collapsing lab, his golden fur blackened with soot, his body positioned protectively over 3 whimpering shapes, a litter of Belgian Malinois puppies, their eyes still sealed shut, abandoned in a reinforced kennel when the staff fled. The mother lay motionless nearby, her harness still sparking from a half-removed Cerberus implant. Rex was trying to drag the puppies to safety one by one, his teeth gripping their scruffs with impossible gentleness despite the carnage surrounding them. When he spotted Harris, the dog's ears flattened in something that looked like shame, as if he'd been caught doing something forbidden. The truth slammed into Harris with the force of a bullet. Rex hadn't just come back for any dogs. He'd come for the ones who couldn't save themselves. A ceiling tile exploded above them, raining down molten debris. Harris lunged forward, stripping off his Kevlar vest to wrap the puppies in as Rex herded them closer. The dog's breathing was labored, his movements slowing. Whether from smoke inhalation or injuries, Harris couldn't tell. Grabbing the last puppy, Harris turned to make a run for the exit just as the entire back wall collapsed, cutting off their escape route. Flames surged higher, the oxygen being sucked from the room so fast Harris's ears popped. Rex let out a hacking cough, his legs buckling slightly before he forced himself upright again. Then, miraculously, a new sound pierced the roar of the fire. A deep, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that shook the remaining glass from the windows. Harris looked up to see a news helicopter hovering impossibly close, its searchlight sweeping through the smoke. A figure rappelled down on a cable. Vance, her face streaked with blood and soot, a firefighter's oxygen mask dangling from one hand. "Grab on!" she screamed, tossing the mask to Harris. He shoved it toward Rex first, but the dog refused, nudging it back insistently toward the whimpering bundle of puppies. The rescue was a blur of heat and noise and pain. Vance harnessed the puppies first, sending them up in a makeshift sling. Harris went next, his arms wrapped around Rex's torso as the cable took their weight. They were 10 feet off the ground when the building finally gave up the ghost, collapsing inward with a thunderous boom that sent a fireball rolling into the pre-dawn sky. The shockwave buffeted the helicopter violently, nearly shaking them loose. Harris locked eyes with Rex as they dangled over the inferno, the dog's gaze steady despite the terror of the situation. In that moment, Harris understood why Jake had loved this animal so fiercely. Back on solid ground, the scene was pandemonium. News crews filmed everything, their spotlights illuminating the smoldering ruins and the rows of rescued K9S being treated by frantic veterinarians. Director Calloway was in cuffs, his expensive suit ruined, his face a mask of stunned disbelief as federal agents read him his rights. Vance collapsed next to Harris on the grass, her hands shaking as she stroked Rex's heaving sides. "You stupid, brave mutt," she whispered, her voice breaking. The dog responded by licking her face once before promptly vomiting black-tinged foam onto the grass. The EMTs descended on them then, forcing oxygen masks over their faces, bundling the puppies into incubators. Harris fought them off long enough to keep a hand on Rex's collar as they loaded the dog onto a stretcher. "He goes where I go," Harris croaked, his throat raw. The paramedics exchanged glances but didn't argue, not when the entire world was watching this particular German shepherd on live television. As dawn broke over Brooksville, the true scale of the night's events began to emerge. Jake's files had gone viral, exposing not just Redmark's atrocities but a web of corruption stretching back years. The surviving Cerberus dogs, now hailed as heroes, were being quarantined at a military base, their implants carefully deactivated. But the 3 puppies Rex had saved were different. The vets couldn't find any trace of neural modifications. They were pure, unaltered K9 stock, the last legacy of a program meant to destroy them. Harris sat on the edge of Rex's veterinary cot, watching the dog's chest rise and fall under layers of bandages. One of the rescued puppies, the smallest, with a white diamond on its chest, was curled against Rex's side, refusing to be separated. The vet chuckled. "That one's a fighter. Like his." She trailed off, her eyes widening as she examined the puppy's blood work. "Sergeant, you need to see this." The DNA results glowed on the tablet screen. Harris's breath caught. The puppy wasn't just any Malinois. He was Rex's biological son, likely bred from Jake's personal protection dogs before the Cerberus program got hold of the mother. Jake's final gift, hidden in plain sight. Rex stirred weakly, nuzzling the puppy closer as if he'd known all along. Outside, the first news vans were pulling up to the clinic, their reporters clamoring for an interview with the K9 heroes of Brooksville. Harris reached for the blinds, plunging the room into peaceful darkness. Let the world wait. Some bonds were worth protecting. The veterinary clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet dog fur as Harris sat vigil beside Rex's recovery kennel, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor the only sound in the otherwise silent room. The Malinois puppy, now unofficially dubbed Jake Jr. by the clinic staff, slept curled against Rex's bandaged flank, his tiny paws twitching as he dreamed. Harris scrolled absently through the news coverage on his phone. The Cerberus scandal dominated every major network, with Rex's heroics playing on loop alongside the footage of Director Calloway's perp walk. But one detail nagged at him: the military's swift seizure of all Project Cerberus files, including Jake's hidden evidence. The official statement claimed national security concerns. But the way Vance had tensed at the news told Harris this wasn't over. The door creaked open, revealing Vance leaning heavily on a crutch, her left leg encased in a walking boot. She tossed a sealed envelope onto Harris's lap. "From Jake," she said quietly. He left instructions with his lawyer to deliver this if the files were ever confiscated. Inside was a single key card and coordinates etched into a dog tag, Rex's original service tag, the metal worn smooth from years of wear. Harris turned it over, revealing a microscopic serial number. Vance's jaw tightened. That's a black site access code. Jake hid backups where no bureaucrat would think to look, inside Rex's old gear. Rex's ears perked up at the sound of his name, his nose twitching toward the dog tag. Before Harris could react, the German Shepherd staggered to his feet with a pained whine, nudging Jake Jr. awake with his muzzle. The puppy yawned, then immediately began chewing on the keycard with enthusiastic growls. Vance snorted. "Guess we know who's inheriting the family business." Outside, a black SUV pulled into the clinic parking lot. Harris tensed, but Vance shook her head. "Relax, that's our ride." She nodded to where two figures in civilian clothes waited. A grizzled man with a K9 unit tattoo peeking from his collar, and a woman whose posture screamed military despite the yoga pants. Jake's old team. They've been running interference since the explosion. The man, Harris recognized him as Captain Ruiz, Jake's former training officer, met his gaze through the window and gave a curt nod. The message was clear. The fight wasn't over, and Rex had just drafted a new generation into it. Jake Jr. let out a playful yip, his tiny teeth gnawing the keycard into a slobbery mess. Rex watched with what could only be described as pride. The sun rose over Brooksville Cemetery, painting the grass in gold as Harris knelt beside two adjacent headstones, Jake Reynolds and Daniel Price. Behind him, Rex sat at perfect attention, his fur almost fully regrown except for the jagged scar along his flank. At his side, Jake Jr., now 6 months old and already showing his father's disciplined bearing, mimicked the posture with comical seriousness. The puppy's harness, custom-made to fit his growing frame, bore the same K9 badge Rex had earned all those years ago. Vance approached, her limp barely noticeable now, holding a stack of freshly printed newspapers. The headline blared, "Cerberus whistleblowers granted immunity, Redmark disbanded." She dropped a folded copy on Jake's grave. "We did it, partner," she murmured. Harris added his own offering, Jake's restored service pistol, its serial number now etched alongside Rex's in the department's Hall of Heroes. A rustling in the nearby trees made Jake Jr.'s ears perk up. A shadow moved, a gaunt figure in a tattered coat, shades. The informant hesitated before tossing a single white lily onto Danny's grave. "They're still out there," he rasped. "New name, same game." Rex growled low in his throat, but it was Jake Jr. who surprised them all. The puppy let out a piercing, alert bark, his nose pointed unerringly at Shade's left pocket. Harris reached out, finding a folded photograph tucked there. A warehouse, a new batch of dogs in cages, a familiar-looking neural device. Vance exhaled sharply. "Round 2? Harris looked down at Rex, then at Jake Jr., remembering Jake's favorite saying, "Evil grows back like weeds." Good men and good dogs gotta keep pulling. He pocketed the photo and reached for his radio. Moral lesson: true loyalty never retires. Whether in the hearts of those who serve or the paws of those who protect, the fight for justice continues. Not because it's easy, but because someone must always stand watch.